Okay, you are now live.
Okay, thank you, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Appeals and Review Committee on Tuesday, the 17th of November, 2020. This virtual meeting is being live streamed as a public meeting. It will also be recorded and the recording subsequently made available via the Council's website. In addition, under the Openness of Local Government Regulations 2014, other people may film, record, tweet, or blog from this meeting. The use of such images or recordings is not under the Council's control. Please note that members of the public viewing the meeting via the live stream can only see the person who is speaking. Also, it takes a second or so for Zoom to switch to that person when they begin. Participants should ensure that their microphones are muted when they are not speaking. Right, I'd like to confirm that all who are present should be present, and will you please give your name and assure me that you can see and hear the proceedings when I call your name. My name is John Capleton. I will be chairing the meeting and I can see and hear all proceedings. Simon Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Simon Bradshaw, I can both see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Julian.
Councillor Howell, I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Keith Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Keith Harris. I can both see and hear proceedings.
And Laurie Needham.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Laurie Needham, and I can see and hear the proceedings.
Right, we'd now like now to verify that all the officers are present and can see and hear the proceedings. First of all, the Information Development Manager, Matt Guncher.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I can both see and hear proceedings.
Principal Solicitor Catherine Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. I confirm I can see and hear the proceedings also.
Okay. Team Leader Mark Fennell. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Senior Landscape Officer Nola MacDonald. Where's she gone? Oh, there we are. She's muted.
Hi, Nola O'Donnell. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Okay, we wouldn't want not to be able to hear you, Nola. Democratic Services Officer Laura Strong.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I can both see and hear the proceedings.
And Democratic Services Officer Nikki Conway.
Thank you, Chair. I can both hear and see the proceedings.
All right, we have two of the objections. Mr. Tyndall, can you confirm you can see and hear the proceedings?
Yes, I can see and hear proceedings.
And Mrs. Swain, can you see and hear the proceedings? Mrs. Swain, you're muted, so I can't hear you.
I should be unmuted. I can hear and see.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, apologies. I don't think we have any apologies, do we, Laura? No, I can see everybody's here, so there can't be any apologies. Therefore, we have a quorum. Now, the minutes of the previous meeting, that's on the 28th of September 2020. I'm sure you remember this covered 11 Ticklow Lane in Shipshed and on 1323 Melton Road, Syston. I'd like all councillors to confirm that they have read the meeting and they have no objections. I, John Capleton, have no objections. Simon?
Thank you, Chair. I have no objections.
Julian?
Thank you, Chair. I have no objections.
Keith?
Thank you, Chair. I have no objections either.
And Laurie?
Thank you, Chair. No objections from me. Thank you.
Right, there are no objections to meetings, so the meetings will be signed and received as noticed. Item 3, questions under other committee procedures 12.8. No questions have been submitted. Disclosure of pecuniary and personal interests. We need this to state this. Yes, Councillor Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I wish to disclose a personal interest in item 5.
Yes.
The objector is known to me in a professional capacity. It was several years ago. I've not discussed this matter with him and I come to the meeting with an open mind. Thank you.
Thank you, that will be noted. I have no personal or pecuniary interest to declare. Anybody else? No, that looks all right. Item 5, the Borough of Charnwood, land adjacent to 17 Riverview, Barrow and Saw, Tree Preservation Order 2020. Could I ask the Principal Solicitor, Catherine Harrison, to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the committee is here tonight to consider the Borough of Charnwood land adjacent to 17 Riverview, Barrow upon Saw Tree Preservation Order. The order was provisionally made as in the opinion of the Council Head of Planning and Regeneration. The trees make a significant contribution to the visual amenity of the area on Riverview. The order has been objected to, and a copy of the objections received enclosed in the agenda this evening. In the agenda pack, there's also a report on behalf of the Head of Planning and Regeneration setting out the Council's response to those objections. Members have been provided with a copy of the agenda for this evening, and they need to consider the contents of the objections and the reports and the debate that you hear tonight and decide whether, in their opinion, the order should be confirmed. Or so if the objection outweighs the order, in which case they decide not to confirm the order, or you may decide to confirm it with modification. So I think I've covered that. The test, that you are considering tonight is whether it's an amenity test and whether in the interest of amenity, the trees subject to the order should be protected. Thank you, Chair.
I also now ask Senior Landscape Officer Nola O'Donnell to present her case in favour of the TPO.
Hello. Yes, a planning application was received by the council to erect a 2-metre high close bordered fence along the roadside. The installation of the fencing would adversely impact the visual landscape and townscape amenity by requiring the removal of 2 ash trees and associated understory trees. The wooded area consists of a mix of deciduous trees, including high canopy and understory species, extending from the road edge down to the river. It provides considerable visual amenity for the housing within the area and contributes significantly to the character of the street scene, and is also of biodiverse value. It is considered that even if if that application were refused, there would still be a significant threat to the removal of trees because, of course, it's outside of any conservation area, and the TPO is the only way of protecting the trees. The site is an overgrown derelict piece of land, which was formerly an allotment garden. It's sandwiched between 2 domestic properties along the bank of the River Soar. So the conditions of the trees are basically that of regenerated vegetation and some fruit trees and also riverside trees that have pre-existed the regeneration. So the land is in a state of disrepair and derelict. So basically we're talking about a regenerated piece of land in terms of succession regeneration. It's going from scrub to woodland, and it appears that way on aerial photography.
Okay.
There was an objection, obviously, that's why we're here. And I noted 11 points to that objection. They objected to the process by which I undertook to create the TPO. They objected to the methodology and questioned whether or not the trees merited amenity, among other things. But perhaps if I could go straight down to my responses to the objection. So in the first instance, they said that the process to create was defective. Well, the process involved visiting the site's locality and assessing the amenity and landscape street value. And because the land wasn't covered by any other constraint to the removal of trees, the only means of protecting the trees was by TPO. One of the aspects of the objection was that we hadn't discussed it with them beforehand. Well, that's not normal to our process to create TPOs. We don't normally discuss in advance of creating them, especially on land which is out with the conservation area, because there is the possibility that a landowner, and I'm not saying this would have happened in this case, but when land is not under a conservation area, we don't normally discuss in advance of creating the TPO with the landowner. So the process was correct. The second point of the 11-point objection is that the process was defective. Well, the methodology, there is no methodology prescribed in law. There are several methods for assessing amenity and monetary value of trees. Halliwell and Tempo are two. They're both arboricultural assessments. There's also CAVIT and iTree that look at monetary value of vegetation. But all that's required for the creation of a TPO is to carry out an amenity assessment. And I have my own ad hoc methodology, which I put into the response, the written response. So I look at various attributes of vegetation and the collective, because we're looking here at a collective of vegetation. We're not assessing individual trees. It's not an arboricultural assessment, it's an amenity assessment. And the trees provide amenity to the area. And indeed the word amenity has an aesthetic element to it. So it's about whether it's a desirable or useful feature within an area. That could be a building, a place, a tree, group of trees, or a woodland. So we're looking at the aesthetic appreciation of the scene. And when I'm assessing that, particularly in regard to an application where some of that vegetation along the street would have been removed to facilitate that development, I had to take the view that if the vegetation is gone and if the fence is in place, what is the impact to that amenity value? Well, the impact would be to remove the amenity from the street. So that very much formed part of the assessment. So it's entirely acceptable to look at it in that way. In my written response, I went through all the government guidance of what you look at when you're carrying out an amenity assessment. And I looked at the visibility, look at collective attributes of trees in this case. There's no rarity or cultural or historic value, so I didn't consider those. So you look also at the future potential of the area as well, and the collective of trees and the contribution they make to that landscape setting and that street.
Okay.
So the next point is, well, that's actually the same point. It's really another part of the issue of amenity, and I think I've answered that already. But the next point, number 4, was they referenced the fact that a lot of trees were self-set. Well, it's irrelevant. It's a neutral point when we're looking at creating an amenity, a TPO based on an amenity assessment, because it's irrelevant whether a tree is planted deliberately by mankind or whether it regenerates naturally. The order, they say, would prevent development. That's not actually true. You can still submit planning applications, and you can manage and develop the site. If you're going to manage the site, if some of the works you want to carry out require a TPO application, you merely submit the TPO application. If you want to develop the site, you can submit your proposals and they would be considered. And sometimes we do have situations where we have a site that's TPO'd, and on planning balance, the TPO might effectively be removed when a site is developed. Normally, when we're assessing an application on a site that's got a TPO, we look to people to provide a design solution that incorporates the trees as much as possible, and also that any losses would be mitigated. So again, development and management of the site are not prevented. The other point, I think, was about appreciation of the river view. Well, obviously, over time, that's occluded somewhat by the vegetation, but again, in terms of my previous point about management and development, the order per se would not prevent ultimately opening up a vantage point for a view to the river, providing it retained the integrity of trees and the amenity value of that along that part of the road. They said that at the area TPO shouldn't have been used. Well, it's not invalid to create an area TPO. It is acceptable, and it's acceptable in this circumstance because I'm assessing the collective, and I assessed it from outwith of the site, and the site can be viewed from Riverview Road, and it can also be appreciated from the public right-of-way, the other side of the river. So there are two advantages to appreciating the trees along there. Certainly when you're down by the river, the willows are very obvious from that vantage. So it's quite important as you're walking along that part of the river to appreciate those trees. What's the other point? There's a lot of points. The clearance of the trees and overgrown vegetation. So it's about wanting to improve the amenity. The applicant felt that the close bordered fencing would be a better amenity than the vegetation, and I think that's a professional disagreement, because I actually think close bordered fencing along there would have a canalizing effect. It would be a very harsh environment, and in view of the fact that there are two other properties along there on that side of the road, the only relief to that appearance of close bordered fencing is this stretch of vegetation along here. There's a little bit of established maintained hedges further along as well, but I did feel that in terms of the quality of the space there and the amenity, the trees are quite important along there. The other point was that the bushes and shrubs and hedges cannot be protected. Well, that's true, except in the case where a hedgerow consists of trees. If a species is normally a tree and considered a tree, such as hawthorn, you can cover them by a TPO. There's nothing to say you can't. Final point is that the land should not be described as woodland. The land presents itself in terms of a landscape characteristic, which is quite evident from the aerial photography, which I appended into the report. You can see from Google's blue sky imagery, it's quite wooded. So I don't know what other way you would describe it other than wood or wooded. It may not have been in the past, it may have been managed as a very, very well looked after allotment, but it has ceased to have that appearance, and it's evident in the aerial photography. So I think I've probably covered all the points. So
Okay.
my recommendation is that the committee confirms the order without modification.
Thank you very much, Nola. Now, any members of the committee now free to ask any questions of Nola, clarification or investigation? No? Well, I'd like to clarify what is actually covered by this TPO, Nola, because I think we've had discussions in the past on when does a bush become a tree? And I think you gave me a diameter of the stem and I think the height of the stem. Now, can I take it therefore the TPO covers those that vegetation which falls into the definition of a tree? In other words, bushes, shrubs, hedges and that could be cut because they are not included in the TPO, or have I got it wrong?
What is covered in this order, because it's territorially defined, is any species which is reasonable to describe as a tree. So hawthorn is a tree, and it doesn't matter how young it is. It's anything that is normally regarded as a tree, such as an ash tree, a willow tree. So even if it's a small little tree, it's a baby tree, it's covered. The stem diameter measure relates to conservation areas only, because that's the trigger size by which a tree is covered by the protection of a conservation area. Anything below 75 mil is not protected by the conservation area designation, even if it's a tree. So this is an area TPO, so every tree within that area is covered by the preservation order.
Thank you. Yes, I'm still struggling a little bit to understand it because I've been to see the area. I could only see it from the road. And so you can see the hawthorn hedge, which is, admittedly overgrown, but at one time it was a hedge. Now, if they just want to bring it back into an operation of a layered hedge, for instance, would that be outside the TPO?
To do that, they would have to submit an application now that there's a TPO, but we wouldn't vexatiously refuse such a thing as hedge laying if it was something that's normal for that area. I'm not sure that hedge laying is, but if they, as I said in the notes, if they wanted to pollard the willows by the river, that's a form of management that is acceptable for willows, particularly along riversides. So it doesn't rule out the possibility of doing work and doing certain aspects of management. The issue and why it came to my attention was the case officer was very concerned about the loss of the trees on the site because she recognized they had an amenity value, and also that the actual installation of the fence would necessarily remove a strip of vegetation all the way along the road, and it would just replace a very harsh, it's 1.8 to 2 meters high, I can't remember offhand, but it's about 1.8 meters high close boarded fence. So that's quite a tall, rigid structure that you can't see through, that you certainly won't be able to see the river view if that's there. So in of itself, I would say it's not an aesthetic solution. And I would agree with you that there are other ways in which one could manage the vegetation that would retain the aesthetic quality of greenery. You could manage a hedge, you could cut the hedge, you could gap up the hedge because there's a few gaps in the hedge. But to actually set work in motion again from a position of having a tree preservation order, you would need to submit an application saying we want to carry out this, And we can actually also consent cyclical periodic work. If there's a cyclical program, say of pollarding trees, the willows, for instance, one could submit an application for a cyclical consent.
In Mr. Tyndall's submission, on page 12 near the bottom, he says, it goes to page 12 of our document. Government guidance requires that TPO should only be served on trees and woodlands where the removal would have significant negative impact on the enjoyment of the local landscape by the public. The owner contends that the clearance of the land back to its previous state and the removal of trees with no significant value would have a significant positive impact on the landscape. That sounds like a reasonable statement. So in order to do that, would he have to put in an application stating exactly what he was going to do on the land, and you'd have to approve or refuse that? I can't hear you, Nolan.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, with the tree preservation order, he would have to submit an application if he wants to do any works to trees that are covered by the order.
Okay. Mr. Tyndall, do you have any questions you'd like to ask, clarification that you want to ask from Nola before you present your own case?
No, thank you. I'm just ready to state my case. Thank you.
Okay. Well, would you like to present your case now then? Is there no further questions?
Yeah, thank you. I've shortened it down from the written sort of objection because that's already been gone through in depth, and I don't think I need to go into that depth again. A few points I'd like to raise is from a professional standpoint, from running a tree surgery company as an arborist, I do not see a way of managing or developing this land safely in its current state without mechanized help. The problem I have with a blanket TPO mechanized help is that something like a small excavator that goes in and removes the material, because the ground is such an unsafe condition, sloped, wet, it would be impossible to risk assess without that. By taking an excavator on there, you cannot guarantee you aren't going to knock a self set or a tree branch. And with a current area TPO, with everything being protected, I'm liable to fault there for doing any works on that land that I can see done safely. I think there's a pretty sort of sketchy line between the actual definition between a tree, a shrub and a hedge, because you could argue that any shrub, as long as its secondary thickens, could be classified as a tree. And by the same way, any tree could be classified as a hedge. I mean, where does elder fall? If you're talking about trees traditionally known as trees, it is a tree, but it's most often a form of shrub or hedge. So I think that's a bit messy, that line there. So it becomes a factor of if it's area TPO'd rather than individually TPO'd, where do I stand? Do I have to check on every single thing I remove to see if it's a tree or a shrub? The hedge, unfortunately, along the roadside can't be laid. I have done extensive look into this. You'll find a lot of the roadside hedge, bar maybe 7 or 8 self sets and a couple of major trees, which the couple of major trees I'm all for retaining, are quite heavily decayed at the base, and a lot of them are dead, and it's actually ivy cover now over a chain link fence that makes up the majority of the hedge. Once that's stripped out, there's not a lot left of that roadside hedge at all, which obviously the ivy can't be protected and can be stripped out as long as it doesn't cause damage to the rest of the hedge. So there's not a lot there to lay, and if you were to lay, they're that old and rotten at the base, it wouldn't be the way of going about it. I'm not sort of here to argue the fence versus hedge thing. The plan permission got denied for the fence, that's fine. I totally understand that. We can go back to that and maybe look at a fence and a hedge planted in front of the fence. But that's for another time. That's not really what I'm here to talk about. Nola mentioned biodiversity. Well, that's pure speculation in my opinion, because no one's done a biodiversity report on the land. Who's to say that there won't be species of higher biodiversity importance that may move in once this work's carried out. It's pure speculation. My member of my family is a qualified ecologist, and there's merits to both, as she sort of put it across to me. There's nothing to say that with development we couldn't put some form of standing water or tighter hedges in better formed hedges that may include a better biodiversity than the land as it currently sits. So I don't really see the validity in that point. The only form of tree that were at risk potentially from the fence going up were the roadside boundary trees. Now, I did put in the application no trees removed as part of the application. We were planning to fence round any existing tree. I'm well aware of the laws. I wouldn't fell a tree without permission for. We put multiple applications in a week. We know the rules. So a simple phone conversation, for instance, would have probably put that at ease to say we did put on the application no trees were being removed. We were going to put the fence in if it was accepted. The hedgerow-y stuff that's not really classed as a tree, the ivy, would need removing for that, but not necessarily the trees. You can leave gaps for those. So to blanket TPO, it doesn't sort of scream to me as the only form of protection. I mean, who's to say they were being removed in the first place? There's nothing in the planning permission to dictate that we were going to. Regarding the rest of the site, there was no factual evidence to suggest that any of the trees outside the fence line were at risk. By NOLA's own admission, no contact was made in fear of safety of the trees. I don't see where that fear would have come from when the application was put in. No works had been carried out, and the only thing we had applied for was basically making the site safe and secure so I can provide my duty of care to the public. I feel that the area TPO is sort of a blunt force instrument, just slapped on quickly, sort that out, stop saying trees being removed without actually delving into the problem, and taking it slightly aside and sort of playing devil's advocate, being so aware of the laws being part of the trade. If I wanted to go in there and remove every tree on the site prior to any of this, I was well aware of the laws. If I wanted to fell everything, it'd have all been gone, because I'm well aware of that. If I wanted to go and level the site, we see it happen all the time. We could have done so. I didn't do that. So if I wanted all the trees gone, they would have all been gone already. That's not what I wanted to do. That's not my aim with the site. So I'm doing things down the proper path and seeking the right permissions, and almost being penalised for that, it seems. Nola says on an email chain you mentioned the conversation, her objection. There was no phone conversation, so anything from that should be null and void. We've never spoke on the phone about this matter. There was an email chain, which Nola dictates that she was happy for the TPO to be modified, I'm quoting here, as long as the boundary trees remain. So why wasn't it just that section that was put under an area TPO? If that was the section in question, fair enough, protect that area and we can come to some form of agreement on that. She also writes, the TPO was created on the basis of amenity to protect the public amenity. Well, I've canvassed the neighbours and I'm currently forming a petition with them. And the overwhelming consensus is they don't like necessarily the state it's currently in with the undergrowth. If it's messy, potentially unsafe for children, with there being no formal boundary there. They don't like the density and the land blocks their river view, which I mentioned in my objection. There was a whole article about. They are 100%, from what I can tell, on board with returning it to some form of usable land. So a land adjacent to, the owners and the properties and the neighbours that boundary this section of land, and me myself, are 100% in favour of turning this back into some form of garden area, recreational area for the family to enjoy. So who is this amenity TPO for if the general consensus from the neighbours is that they don't want it as it currently is and don't enjoy it as it currently is? The landowner himself and general passers-by we've spoken to, and people that walk on the side of the river. Now, I haven't got the evidence of that to back me up, but I could get that no problem. So really, the amenity from the roadside shouldn't really be affected by what people can see across the river. So yeah, that doesn't really sit right with me there. And my personal opinion on the amenity is, as Nola stated, it's sort of a matter of opinion. There's no sort of formal literature to say this is what amenity means. My opinion is that you've got hundreds of yards of houses with nice gardens and jetties with boats. So I'm very, very aesthetically pleasing when you walk down the riverside. And the house next door that land used to belong to has been sort of renovated and looks lovely. There's hedges, there are statement trees, but the areas aren't messy and overgrown. So this almost sticks out like a sore thumb compared to the rest. And I have had lots of comments from people that do know I own the land to say, what's the deal with this? Why is it derelict? You've got a very nice aesthetic the whole way along, followed by essentially a mess and overgrown area. Finally, my last point is that I'm a fully qualified arborist and a tree surveyor by trade. I have a good reputation and I carry out tree surveys from multiple local councils around the area, schools, business parks, private properties and private landowners. If anyone's in a position to judge and rectify and maintain my trees and land, surely it should be me, as I'm not only asked to do that as a job, but paid to do that as a job. I don't sort of feel like I need my hand holding and have to enter a planning permission for 8 weeks notice to remove what's potentially a self-set tree that I deem in the wrong location to grow, or every time I want to move something from one location to another, or add a pathway in for as such that requires wood chip that might damage the root base or a tree needs removing. I think that I'm heavily qualified enough to make those assessments and retain what is worth retaining. Governmental guidelines dictate, and I am paraphrasing here because I don't have the exact quote in front of me, a TPO is not deemed necessary if trees can be proved to be under good maintenance or a reasonable maintenance plan or shown to be under good care. And that is to be applied going forwards. Well, I do have a plan in place for where I'd like to regenerate the land and trees I'd like to retain, and I am totally game for retaining the riverside willows. There's a couple of trees that multiple parties have tried to cut down in the past from neighbouring properties on the roadside that I've stated will stay forever. They are some of my favourite trees. So my argument would be remove the blanket TPO, as I think it's blunt force, and it means that forevermore, if I plant a tree in 5 years' time and choose to move that tree in 10 years' time, then I can't do that without permission. Let me carry out the health and safety works. Then me and a tree officer such as NOLA can do a site visit when I've made it safe and apply individual TPOs to trees of importance and of amenity value, aesthetic value, and also look at regenerating the land in a good way for biodiversity and for the amenity value, planting native species and so on and so forth. So that's it really, that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Tindall.
Thank you.
Let me check if any members of the committee require any additional information or clarification from either parties. Yes, Julian.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask, how are you going to secure the property? You've had the panel fence refused. You say you can't lay the hedge. So how do you propose to secure the property? And also, it didn't quite clear to me, what do you intend to do with the property? Clean all the scrub out and leave just a few trees there, or what? Thank you.
Are you happy to answer that, Mr. Tindall?
Yes, yeah. So the issue we currently have is my biggest problem at the minute is my duty of care to the members of the public. We have trespassers on site currently. There is a fishing peg being made without my permission that people could be illegally fishing off, and vandalism to the site and trees. So my problem is I've got to find a way of now securing that land. It's not a secure boundary currently. There are holes in the fence. It is regularly trespassed. So my idea was with a feather edge fence, which really this isn't about as such, is that I want to put a secure boundary so I don't get sued when someone slips down there, knocks himself, because it's a hell of a slope coming down off the road. Now that's been refused, totally fine. I understand that happens with planning permission. my next protocol is to go back and adjust that plan permission, maybe propose a slightly smaller fence with a hedge planted in front. So the hedge will grow while the fence provides protection, and then eventually there's a move there to look to remove the fence when the hedge is suitable enough. But we've had the police involved and stuff in the past, and the problem occurs with the fact that at the moment, if you plant a little hedge in, then it just wouldn't take, and people would walk all over it and run all over it, and cars parked on it. So it needs some form of fixed boundary there. We have put no trespassing sign, and people enter at their own risk up just to get us by, but it's not a suitable long-term solution, nor is the hedge as it currently stands. And regarding what I plan to do with the area, I mean, for me, from a personal standpoint, I grew up in the house. Well, my mother's mother owned the house next door and was sold in the kept section of land. I do have memories of playing on the land, building tree houses, so on and so forth. It also means it's highly significant to my mother, who's unfortunately can't walk and can't maintain this area. That's one of the reasons that I bought the section of land from her, so I could bring it up to a standard that potentially at some point we allow disabled access to, or access for some form of day shed or something we can all go enjoy as a family and friends. At the moment, there's no plans further than that, than to make the site safe, secure, and have statement trees. I don't want to level everything. That's not what I'm about. I'm all game for retaining trees where possible, but it's got to be reasonable. Some of the self-sets are not ideally located at all on the side of the bank. Much better off to have a formal hedge along there and a fence boundary, and then have some trees planted in ideal positions that are better species technically, as a matter of opinion, inside the land itself.
Thanks very much, Mr. Tyndall. Now, are the any members of the committee require any other information or clarification from either party?
Councillor Capleton, we can't hear you. You've got, sorry.
Sorry, okay.
Okay.
The committee, with advice of the legal officer as necessary, will now discuss the matter and then decide whether or not the order should be confirmed, and if so, whether with or without modification. During this part of the meeting, the parties may not participate. However, this remains a public meeting and the parties may continue to do so if they wish. So, members of the committee, has anybody any views? Julian, you look as if you're about to say something profound.
Thank you, Chair. No, it's very difficult. I've looked at, in the past when we've made these decisions, the first thing is that we're looking at what's there now, not how it got there. Whether it's accidental or deliberate, it's what's there now. The second thing I thought of is the fact about the view, but we, with regards to TPOs, as far as I'm aware, we can't take that into account at all. The fact that a third party's view is obstructed by trees, I don't think we can consider. No, as I say, I mean, they were just the two things I thought of. So I just pop.
Well, from my own point of view, I find a bit uncomfortable with a blanket TPO like this. I'm very much in favour of trees being protected, but the whole site, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. It does seem to inhibit any sort of development or work on it. Laurie? Laurie?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I think I feel sort of similar to yourself, Chair, in that it does seem that Mr. Tyndall is making fairly reasonable comments about how, you know, he needs to work in the area, and a blanket,
yes,
you know, seems very restrictive to what he's trying to do. And it does sound, I'm feeling personally that perhaps we could do something with some sort of modification. So the vast majority of the site's still protected, but that Mr. Tyndall could still do some work, you know, to, as he was saying, you know, be able to access the land in a, you know, safe way so that they can use it. Exactly what modification, I'm not entirely sure, but I suppose that's something we should discuss.
any other comments? Yes, Simon?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm a bit like Councillor Needham. I feel like we ought to allow Mr. Tyndall to do something with the land, possibly with the hedge as well, because he needs to make it secure to stop trespassers. So is there something we can do on that front, perhaps?
Well, this is obviously the massive topic. We've got to either endorse a TPO or refuse a TPO, or we can refuse it with modification. I really think to modify it is, you know, going to take quite a lot of work. Not something that we can actually come up tonight, unless we could say we want it modified so that we leave the TPO on all, I don't know, mature trees, but then again, that's probably open to interpretation. Keith, would your hand up?
Yes,
Keith?
thank you, Chair. I was thinking on that, along those lines, because how do we stipulate with conditions what can be felled and what can't? A few little trees all over the place normally wouldn't be subject to a TPO at all.
No,
it's only because they're there with the more mature ones. So it seems completely unreasonable to me to stop Mr. Tyndall from pulling out almost with his hand a few seedlings here and there. So I'm not sure how we can do that. Maybe Nola could suggest how we could pinpoint more the particular trees that are contributing to the amenity value, and exclude ones which are not. But I don't know how logistically that could be done.
Chair, I think the legal advisors like to.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. Although happy to have advice from Nola on this as well. But in my opinion, the modifications we can make on an area order are more limited than we could on individual trees being specified in an order. Any changes you make can't be significant. The guidance is against changing between categories as an example of a significant change that couldn't be done on a modification. And with an area, we haven't got individual trees that could be removed from it or it narrowed in that way. So I think our options, unless Nola has a different view, are more limited for modifying this form of TPO.
Thank you. Wow. So really, Catherine, Catherine, you just recognise the difficulty in modifying the TPO. So
yeah, it can be. I suppose the options are if you consider the order is justified on its amenity value as an area order, they can be modified afterwards. You can TPOs can be amended afterwards and become more specific, or if you're worried in the short term as an emergency protection, we could make the option is to confirm the order, in which case the whole area would be protected, and it could perhaps be something that was looked at afterwards, although we can't tonight. It's just to consider this order and what happens afterwards. We couldn't make any use of assurances or promises on, but I think in terms of actually modifying this order, in my view, the options are limited on an area.
Yes.
Unless Nola or Mark have a of you who are making these orders more often, then
Well, I can't think of any way in which we could actually modify it here tonight. But the dilemma is, of course, if we lift the TPO, it makes the whole site vulnerable. If we do lift the TPO, it puts a lot of pressure on NOLA to then specify which trees are to be protected and which not. Well, we've got to make a decision somewhere. I propose that we refuse this TPO, unmodified.
So sorry, Chair, that's deciding not to confirm the TPO. Is that right? Yeah, thank you.
Right. Any seconders?
I'll be happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you. That's Simon Bradshaw, Councillor Bradshaw seconding it. Councillor Needham, you for or against?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute then. Yes, I'm for.
You're for.
Yeah.
Councillor Howell, yes, I'm for.
And Councillor Harris?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd be for.
So therefore, having considered in accordance with the procedure set out in the Council's constitution the objection to the order, the committee considered the reasons put forward for not protecting the trees outweigh the contribution they make to the amenity of the area, and the trees should therefore not be protected. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Tyndall, for your attendance. Okay, now we have item 6, and that is the Borough of Charnwood. It's the Vicarage 52 Main Street, Cossington, a tree preservation order. Could I ask the Principal Solicitor, Catherine Harrison, to introduce the report, please?
yes, thank you, Chair. So item 6 is the Borough of Charnwood Vicarage 52 Main Street, Cossington tree preservation order. The order has been made provisionally in the view of the Head of Planning Regeneration that the trees make a significant contribution to the visual amenity of the area and the approach to the Church of All Saints. The provisional order has been objected to, and a copy of the draft order, the full written objection, and the Head of Planning and Regeneration's report are contained within the agenda. Again, the options open to members tonight are to either confirm the order, in which case it will last, so be valid into the future. Decline to confirm the order, in which case it falls away once it's been endorsed, or it could be confirmed with modification. As before, the test that you're considering is whether in the interests of amenity of the area, the order ought to be confirmed, having regards to the objections and the debate that you hear tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask the Senior Ecological Officer, Nola O'Donnell, to present her case, please? Are you muted? Are you muted, Nola? You unmute yourself, Nola, please. There we are.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yes, a section 211 notice was received seeking to undertake a range of works, including the removal of the understory trees and crown reduction of intermediate sized trees. Now, the Vicarage Gardens form part of the approach to Church of All Saints, a Grade 2 listed building. It is considered that the tree belt along the southern boundary of the property is an important landscape feature for the setting of the church. In all, 18 of 31 trees or tall woody shrubs were marked for removal. In particular, the removal of 3 yew trees and all of the holly were considered adverse and unwarranted. That is, the removal of them was considered adverse. In addition, they proposed reducing a remaining yew. Collectively, the amount of work proposed would have had a cumulative effect on the characteristic of the understory. So it also, I think, should be borne in mind that yew and holly have historic associations with churches and churchyards and graveyards that stretch all the way back to ancient times. The purpose of the TPO in this regard is to retain the integrity of the tree belt, which consists of high canopy specimens and understory. So some of the work obviously could be carried out, and all the exempt work could still be carried out, and that includes the removal of dead wood. So the condition of the trees generally ranged from fair to good, and the order covers individual trees and groups of trees. The remainder of the vegetation, which are trees and shrubs, are not covered. So there's still a lot of scope for the owners to carry out works. The objection raised had 2 points to it. They said that permission for work cannot be granted at time, which I think is a misunderstanding of the process. And that the imposition of the TPO prevents design and planning of their garden. One of the things that Mrs. Swain said in her objection was that she hoped it's clear that, I'll read it as it is. I hope it's clear that my objection isn't necessarily an objection as such to the TPO, but to the non-grant of permission for the works to go ahead whilst the TPO was being administered. Although as we fall under a conservation area, the TPOs do not seem necessary. So my response to the objection is that the only effective instrument for the protection of trees is to serve a TPO. The conservation area designation merely places an obligation on tree owners to give notice of an intention to carry out works. And the purpose of that is for the local authority to actually consider placing the trees under a TPO. So the decision pathway is either we create a TPO or we don't. And in this case, I have opted for creating the TPO. And as I say, it's not on all the trees, it's on particular groups and particular individual trees. So it is possible for owners of TPO trees to apply for works to their trees. We deal with these applications all the time, and the vast majority receive conditional consent. It's only a small fraction of the overall applications that get refused. So what it gives is the council more oversight over what happens to the trees. It does not prevent carrying out works to trees. The Section 211 notice process, as I say, is about giving us the ability to protect the trees. So the other point she made was that she felt that she couldn't design and plan a garden. Well, the order doesn't prevent this in any way whatsoever. And she can continue to make applications to, which now would be TPO applications, not notices to carry out work. So she can submit TPO applications to carry out work. As I said, trees that were in her Section 211 notice that are not covered by the TPO, she is permitted to carry out that work. Just to wrap up, my recommendation is to confirm the order without modification.
Thank you very much, Nola. Any members of the committee have any questions for Nola? No. Simon?
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite familiar with this area, actually. No, and question is to Nola. I would imagine these trees have been there for a heck of a long time. This is quite a historical area. So how long in fact do you think they've actually been there?
Well, I would think trees, not necessarily these trees, but trees would have been there going right back to when the church was built, because as I say, holly and yew trees are traditionally associated with churches, and indeed the respect for those trees where people are buried, and indeed the greenery, they're evergreen. There's all kinds of connections to pre-Christian belief systems about warding away evil spirits. So we're talking about something that goes right back into antiquity, and the vegetation that is associated with the vicarage and with the church. The species themselves are quite important in the context of now Christian churchyards. Sorry, what was the other point?
No, that's it. Thank you. I was just wondering how old you thought these particular ones were.
No, I'm a landscape architect and not an arborist, and when I hazard to guess the age group of trees, I look to broad age categories. I don't look to being able to be precise about it. An arborist, such as Mr. Tyndall, would be able to tell you probably, but I would say that the trees which are forming the high canopy are mature trees. Some of the younger trees, which I did not cover in the order, were some maples to the back, and they're quite suppressed because of the overall high canopy, and they would be classed as young trees. And I felt that they had poor form. They were really behaving as understory, so they're quite gnarled and twisted in some cases, but as a line of trees, they were not a particular merit, and I felt even as an understory, because they were a contrived line of trees, that protecting them under the order would not be justified, so I left them out of the order.
Oh, thank you, Nola. That's great. Thank you.
Anybody else? Any questions for Nola? Nola, the trees that there's what do you call T1 and T2, the sycamore and the maple on the corner of the road by the War Memorial, the big ones. They seem to be very close together, almost intertwined on the corner there.
Yes, I mean, when trees grow in a group environment, they actually form what's known in arboriculture as a composite crown. They behave together. It's almost like a dance. They very much grow within association with each other. I think it's not beneficial to think of them in a reductive sense. So even though they might be TPO'd individually, trees within a group setting where they form a unified landscape feature, the proximity and the way they grow together isn't necessarily a problem, because they're forming a landscape feature together.
And in the group, the G1, I note that you've listed them all individually. That's good. What I suppose really, if they wanted to trim them and bring them under control, because a lot of them are grown out of control, that would require an application to you, would it?
If they wanted to carry out any works, they would have to submit an application, yes.
Okay.
But as I said before, the placing of a tree under TPO does not prevent management. It doesn't prevent future works, and should it be necessary, let's say one of these trees was to suddenly decline and become dangerous, they could take them out if they were dangerous, but they'd have to support their request with evidence. So what the TPO does is it gives us oversight, so that you know, that their management is
Yeah.
more controlled and what happens to them is more controlled.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Swain, are you still there? Hello, Mrs. Swain? Mrs. Swain, you're muted. We can't hear you if you're speaking.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yes.
Before you present your case, do you have any questions you'd like to ask of Nola?
At the moment, not really. I'll be honest.
If you'd like to present your case, let us know your argument.
Yes, I'll be honest. I'm certainly not going to be quite as professional as the last gentleman. Unfortunately, it's certainly not my my speciality. I suppose the one thing for myself from this is that we actually employed an arboriculturalist, a specialist, to put the report together on the condition of the trees with the recommendations of work, which obviously, because we don't have that expertise, that's the reason we actually employed someone to do that for us, which is the reason that I'm quite frustrated about all of this, in particular with regards to the work that is required. The property was owned by the Diocese of Leicester, and very, very minimal work has been done, not just with the garden, but with the house itself. So you can obviously imagine the reason that we're putting this forward. We've bought this house as a family property. So we're looking to maintain the trees so that we can actually prolong their life as much as possible, and so that we can actually have a garden that looks like a very nice, for want of a better word, a nicely manicured garden, rather than just having one that looks like it's full of self-seeded trees that are not in particularly good order or condition. One of the things that has come through from a lot of the notes that have come out is that obviously the report that was done was actually, or what I asked for with the report is that it was noted for the condition of the trees and the work that was required to the trees. I wasn't aware that I also needed to submit any proposals with regards to our intentions for, say, re-hedging or replanting should we remove any trees within the garden. I assume a site visit has been conducted based on the comments, and therefore you will probably have noted that we have a 3-bar fence with no sort of protection there, both from a security point of view and also from the point of view that I have a young child of 2.5, so it could be very easy for her to obviously get out and out onto the main road. So we weren't aware that we also had to submit any proposals to back it up in terms of what we may sort of replant to then regenerate the area. So I suppose that's where my frustration has come, because we just want to make it a beautiful garden in a lovely area. I don't really know what else I can add to that, other than the fact that we've done everything I thought was right. I contacted Nola on a number of occasions to ask for some advice. So obviously, if I haven't done something, I feel a little bit frustrated, as I did try to do my background before submitting some kind of report for the work. And I don't believe there's anything that's been highlighted on there in terms of work or removal that is not based on a professional's opinion of condition, or, as some of it is noted, is actually suppression from other larger trees in the area. I'm not really sure there's much more that I can add to that other than what I've said so far.
Thank you very much, Mr. Swain. Thank you. Nola, do you have any questions you wish to ask of Mrs. Swain?
Sorry, I don't have any questions, but if you wanted me to answer any of her points, I could answer.
Well, would you like to do that?
She raised the issue again with the process, which we call Section 211 notices. This applies to conservation areas. It's a requirement to submit a notification of an intention to carry out works. This is a process for the council to consider placing trees under DPO. That is the purpose of it. What I'd like to express is that, or clarify, is that it's not a punitive thing for us to do that. It is part of the process to do that. The other thing is she felt that she had to submit more information or other information. Everything that was required for a Section 211 notice was properly submitted. She was not under any obligation to submit any other information, but if she wanted to, she could have. As regards the professional opinion of her arborist, I agree that may be his professional opinion, but my opinion was that the work was not merited and it would potentially damage the trees. The other thing is the use of the term suppressed and suppression, where one tree suppresses another tree. I looked at the trees along that area in terms of woodland characteristics, and in natural environment, you have what's known as high canopy trees, and then you have an intermediate canopy, which is part of the understory, and then you have lower canopy, and then you have a shrub layer, and then you have a herbage layer. So there would be a natural structure there, and you would not expect necessarily that understory trees would not be suppressed, because if there are high canopy trees there, they will suppress what's underneath them. That's not a bad thing in of itself. I'm just trying to explain that if a tree is suppressed or over-dominated by another tree, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
It's not necessarily a good thing. It's a neutral point I'm trying to make. It's about where the tree is in the structure, in a woodland structure. And many of the hollies and the yew trees are behaving as understory. They still merit protection as understory trees. It's better if there is a structure there going from high canopy to intermediate and lower understory and shrub layer. It's actually better to retain that kind of structure. So stripping out the herbage layer and stripping out the shrub layer and even the understory layer could leave the high canopy trees quite exposed at the lower level in terms of air movement. So it's important to understand it in terms not just of its landscape value or its amenity value, but how it functions as a habitat. The other point I would like to make is that I was rather concerned that there was a lot of stripping out of the herbage layer. Of course, I can't protect the herbage layer, but she did mention about how she wants to develop the garden. The simple fact is the garden has a characteristic, which is woodland or woodland edge. And often, as a landscape architect and involved in garden design in the past, it's a misunderstanding to think that you could have, say, a Mediterranean style garden close to, say, a bank of trees, or even a very high quality lawn, for instance. The characteristic of that area is woodland, woodland edge, and really the best way to develop that garden would be as a woodland garden. So the idea of stripping things away to make a better garden is not necessarily the best thing to do, and it's not necessarily the best thing to do for the trees.
Thank you, Nora. have any members of the committee any questions they wish to ask of Mrs. Swain or any of the other parties? No? Oh. Yes, Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I fully understand Mrs. Swain's concerns about the safety for her children. If there are dangerous branches lurking around, then they need to be removed fairly quickly. But I would have thought under the TPO, by definition, you can have work done to remove anything dangerous anyway. So the question would be whether what else she has in store for the garden would diminish the amenity value. So if we were to uphold the TPO, she can make sure that her children are safe and do that immediately. And the question then remains, what else can be done with it? And her experts' projections for what could be done are his opinion. It may not be our opinion or other people's opinion of what is the amenity value.
Thank you, Keith. So, no other questions? Well, if not, then
Chair, could I just because Nola had the opportunity to come back after Mrs. Swain had put a case, can we just double check Mrs. Swain there was nothing else she wanted to say before you move to the debate? Would that be okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you.
Do you miss Mrs. Swain, anything more further you want to say? No?
Can you hear me?
No, now we can.
Sorry. I totally appreciate Nola's opinion in terms of, or not so much opinion, professional knowledge on, the suggestion from the point of view of a woodland garden. The one thing that I want to make very clear, I'm not looking to, or the overall plan for the garden is not to try and make a Mediterranean garden at all. I'm actually all for keeping trees as much as possible. I grew up on a farm locally, so I'm all for wildlife, etc., etc. What my intention is just to try and make it more of a, I don't even know how to say, to landscape it a little bit more whilst retaining that edge, that border. But as mentioned, the one thing that's not been discussed that I would have rather have discussed before we start putting TPOs on everything, as Nola's already highlighted, is that I haven't discussed hedging and fencing. I'm not a fan of slapping up your featherboard fence, your 6-foot fence, and things like that. I'd rather keep it in keeping with the area, and either plant some hedging that would work with that, and actually to work with planning on that, or to be perfectly honest, a very nice metal railing of some kind, and that's based on keeping the look of the area as well as adding to it for our benefit of having a very nice garden as well. So it's just so that, I'm not looking to strip it out and make it some kind of wonderful Mediterranean garden with all these fancy plants in. That's not my intention. But obviously, I do appreciate that, we are in the area we're in and we're in conservation, and, you will all have your opinions on that as well. So I just wanted to let you know.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Swain. We'll take note of that. If there are no further questions, well then the committee, with advice of its legal advisor as necessary, will now discuss the matter and then decide whether or not the order should be confirmed, and if so, whether with or without modification. During this part of the meeting, the parties may not participate. However, This remains a public meeting and the parties may continue to observe if they wish. Right, committee. Who's going to start with any opinion, suggestion? Or is it down to me? Yes, I certainly do not see this this TPO as being sort of almost as draconian as the last one. I like the way that all the trees have been named that are being protected. Personally, I would endorse this TPO. Anybody else? Laurie?
Thank you. Yeah, I feel the same about this. I think it's sometimes it often happens with these TPOs, doesn't it? That if the owners are unfamiliar with TPOs, it creates an impression that they can't do anything to the tree, but that's not the case, as we know from discussion now and the clarification that we've had. And I don't think it's in any doubt. I mean, Mrs. Swain even says herself, you know, the amenity value of these trees.
Yes.
I don't think he's in any doubt whatsoever. And I think that possibly Mrs. Swain herself, you know, isn't necessarily objecting to the TPO. It's that, you know, how the process has been handled for some works to be done to the trees. So hopefully that will get resolved. But I'm also in favour of retaining the TPOs without modification.
Anybody else? Anybody else anything to say? No. Well, okay, then put a proposal forward. I propose that we endorse the TPO and leave it standing. Do I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second that, Councillor.
Thank you. Now we need the other councillors to tell us for or against. Councillor Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be for the proposal. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I'm for the proposal.
And Councillor Howell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm for the proposal.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor.
Right.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Chair.
Yes.
Sorry. I know you proposed and seconded, but could we just record your vote just for correctness?
Yes, I'm in favour.
And the same for Councillor Needham too, please.
I'm also in favour.
Okay. So therefore, having considered in accordance with the procedure set out in the Council's constitution the objection to the order, the committee considers that the reasons put forward for not protecting the trees do not outweigh the contribution they make to the amenity area, and the trees should therefore remain protected. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming along, Mrs. Swain.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, now we move on to item 7, which is the Borough of Charnwood, 16 Orton Close, Rearsby Tree Preservation Order. Could I ask the Principal Solicitor to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just bear with me so I've not got papers in order. Sorry, still on the last item. On front. Oh. Thank you. We're here tonight to consider the Borough of Charnwood 16 Orton Close and Rearsby Tree Preservation Order. The order has been made provisionally, and a copy of it is contained in tonight's agenda. The order has been objected to, so it is before members to decide whether to confirm the order or not. A copy of the full objection is contained at Annex 2 of the agenda for this item, and there's also a copy of the report of the Head of Planning and Generation, which responds to the objection and sets out the reasons for making the order provisionally. Once again, it's a test of amenity, so whether the amenity value of the trees outweighs the objections and that they ought to be protected. And the options available, the options are to confirm the order with or without modification, or to decline to confirm the order, in which case it will fall away once it's been endorsed. And thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Nola, would you like to present your case?
Yes. Hello. Two Section 102 notices were received in connection to this address. The first related to an ash tree to the frontage of the property, to fell that tree. And the other one was to undertake a crown reduction to a maple in the rear garden. In the case of the ash tree, it's a prominent young ash tree, and it provides a focal point at the end of that part of the close. The notice to fell was in response to branch drop as a result of storm conditions. Such branch drop is not indicative of a dangerous tree. It's what's known as an unforeseen event, unpreventable occurrence, insofar as it might occur to healthy live wood. If dead wood is in the tree, strong wind will knock dead wood out of a tree. So if anything, what it indicates is that in the situation of a tree that might have dead wood, the dead wood should be regularly removed and not left sitting in the tree. In the case of the maple, it formed part of the backdrop greenery to the rear garden, which is visible from a public footpath. So both trees are healthy and worthy of attention and preservation. I included for reference here the summary sheet for the assessment of the amenity value. So I looked at various attributes, and I looked at the fact that the tree had previously, the ash tree had previously been poorly worked, and I in fact gave advice on remedial work to the previous owner. I think the reported branch drop is to be expected. We had unseasonably strong winds. And again, I repeat that it's not an indicator of a dangerous tree. So the objections from Mr. Gill were threefold. He was disappointed that there was no prior consultation. He claims that the trees randomly drop branches and that the trees are dangerous, at least that the ash is dangerous. My response to his objections are that indeed, to reiterate what I've already said today, is that Section 211 notice is for the authority to consider placing a tree under TPO. And certainly that is something that we would do if we felt that the work being proposed was not merited and was to the detriment of the tree and would remove an amenity. The trees have amenity value. They merit protection because of their amenity value. And what I would say is of course, it is always possible to maintain trees that have TPOs through the application to carry out tree works. Small branches will fall from trees, and that is natural. And of course, storms will increase that possibility by the lateral force will create what's known as shear stress. And that can cause even healthy branches to snap off. It can weaken them, and then they can fall off later after the wind has subsided. So as I say, you can't predict whether a branch will fall in the wind or not. And it doesn't mean a tree is dangerous. And this is the key point. He claimed the tree was dangerous and he wanted to remove it on that basis. And I put the TPO on the tree on the basis that it has amenity value and it is not dangerous. So the trees, neither of the trees exhibit any structural loss of integrity, and there is no significant incident of decay present. So there's no indicator for danger in these trees. So finally, I would just like to say that I recommend that the order be confirmed without modification.
Thank you very much, Nola. Right, Mr. Gill hasn't arrived, so we won't be able to hear from the objector. So any members of the committee wish to, any additional information? Keith?
Thank you, Chair. I would have thought that I'm looking at the photo here, I would have thought that the amenity value of the ash at the front was a bit of a no-brainer, because it's such a prominent specimen. And I really think if the owner has just recently acquired the property, I think it was pretty obvious that if it was a dangerous tree, it was going to cause problems at some point. And as Nola says, even if it wasn't dangerous at that point, any tree can be dangerous in unusual conditions. So buying a house with a large tree in front of it is asking for trouble, if at some point anyway, because you can't predict that kind of thing. And the TPO doesn't stop removal of any future dangerous branches. So I can't really see that there's any merit in the objection at all.
Thank you, Keith. Anybody else anything to say? Julian?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor Harris has said virtually word for word my thoughts on this. It's in a conservation area already, or both the trees are. And as I say, trees can be a danger, but if they're managed properly, the danger can be reduced.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry. Can I just check? We're still in Councillor's questions to Nola rather than considering the item, aren't we?
Still in Councillor's
I think, yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to ask of Nola, I think the one of the trees, the one in the maple in the back, they weren't talking about removing it, they were talking about reducing the height. Do you have any comments?
Yes, that's correct. I felt that that would be that would be a detriment to its amenity value.
That would what?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
That it would be to the detriment of the tree if it was crown reduced.
Okay. Okay, nobody else, any more questions? Well, if that's the case, the committee, with the advice of its legal advisor as necessary, will now discuss the matter, then decide whether or not the order should be confirmed, and if so, whether with or without modification. During this part of the meeting, the parties may not participate. However, this remains a public meeting and parties may continue to observe as they wish. Right, committee views. Right, Simon?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've got quite a few trees around where I live. I mean, they all lose branches when there's a heavy storm or heavy winds. I mean, it's not a reason to go and chop them all down, really.
No.
So, you know.
No, I agree. And, you know, especially a relatively young tree like that, you'll get a little bit of fall, but an old tree gets something more substantial. No, when I went to Orton Close to have a look, and there's, you know, it's a very prominent tree at the end of Orton Close. Not so impressive now because it's lost all its leaves, but the photographs shows it's really, I think it adds a lot to the area. So I'd like to propose that we retain the tree preservation order.
I'll second that, Chair.
Right, Julie, second. So we need a vote. My vote, Councillor Capleton, is in favour. Councillor Needham?
I'm in favour.
Yes, Councillor Howe?
I'm in favour of confirming the order.
Councillor Harris?
I'm in favour of confirming the order.
And Councillor Bradshaw?
Yes, I'm in favour of confirming as well, Chair. Thank you.
Right, so therefore, the committee, having considered in accordance with the procedure set out in the council's constitution the objection to the order, the committee considers that the reasons put forward for not protecting the trees do not outweigh the contribution they make to the amenity area, and the tree should therefore remain protected. So thank you very much, everybody. That's thank you all for coming, and see you next time.
Thank you. We just
Thank
wait.
you.